Hello. So today we're going to be doing 4.1 notes, solved by taking the square root and completing the square. Alright, so it says solving quadratic equations by taking the square root is possible when the equation is missing a b value, so the middle term. So the first example is we're going to be taking the square root. And so looking at number 1, okay, we have x squared is equal to 4. I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. So the square root of x squared is x. The square root of 4 is plus or minus 2. All right, so most students forget the plus or minus. Look at number 2. What we're going to do first is we're going to move the 24 over by adding. You always do the opposite. So we have x squared is equal to 24. Now we take the square root of both sides. So again, the square root of x squared is x. And then looking at 24, y'all can either do the factor trees or y'all can do the perfect square root method. It's really up to y'all. I'll show both methods. So if you guys are doing the factor trees, the factors of 24 is 2 times 12. 12 breaks down to 2 and 6, and then 6 breaks down to 2 and 3. Because it's a square root, you're going to take a pair of the same number out. So I'm taking 2 out. Make sure y'all have your plus or minus. And then these values over here stay inside the radical. So 2 times 3 gives us 6. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. If you guys want to do the square root method, okay, you look for the perfect square root that goes in. So the square root of 24 could be the square root of 4 times the square root of 6, right? 4 times 6 is 24. The square root of 4 is 2, root 6, and make sure you have your plus or minus. All right, so look at number 3. We have negative 4x squared plus 13 is equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and move the 13 over. All right, before you take the square root, you have to get x squared by itself. Okay, so you have to get this guy by itself. So in order to do that, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4. So then we have x squared is equal to, negative divided by negative is positive, so we have 13 all over 4. And now we can take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of this side, square root of this side. So the square root of x squared again is x. The square root of 13 over 4, we can break this down to be the square root of 13, all of the square root of 4. Make sure you have the plus or minus. What's the square root of 13? As a prime number, it just stays like that. And the square root of 4 is 2. All right, look at number 5. We have negative 5x squared plus 3 is equal to 10. Again, the whole objective is to get x squared by itself. So first I'm going to go ahead and subtract 3 from both sides. I have negative 5x squared is equal to 7. I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by negative 5 because I need to get x squared by itself. So x squared is equal to negative 7 over 5. Notice that negative could be on top, bottom, or in the middle. Typically we put it in the middle. All right, so then we need to get x by itself, so we're going to take we need to get x squared by, we need to take the square root of x squared, so we get x by itself, and then we're going to take the square root of the other side. Wow, that looks really funky. No, not any better. Okay, you guys understand, right? So then we get the square root of negative 7 over 5. So real quick, what this means is we have the square root of 7 over 5 times the square root of negative 1. And from previous lessons, you guys know that the square root of negative 1 is I. Ooh, don't know what happened there. I don't know what's going on. Okay. So we know from previous lesson that this guy is I. I is equal to the square root of negative 1. And so what we can do now is we can break up the square root. So I can say it's the square root of 7 all over the square root of 5 times I. Typically, we don't like square roots on the bottom, so to get rid of it, we do something called rationalizing the denominator. All that means is you're going to multiply top and bottom by the radical. So we multiply the top and bottom by the radical of root 5. So on top, you multiply the square roots. The square root of 7 times the square root of 5 gives us the square root of 35. and I'm going to put I right here. Notice that the I is outside the radical, is not inside. And then square root of 5 times square root of 5 is just 5. Or if y'all want to think about it, square root of 5 times square root of 5 is square root of 25, and then square root of 25 is 5. All right, and then make sure you guys have your plus and minus. All right, some textbooks, they put I in front, so you could see it like plus or minus I root 35 all over 5. It really doesn't matter. Just choose whatever works for you. Just make sure that this I is not inside the radical. All right. So then going to number 6, we're going to simplify negative 2i, the whole thing squared. All right, so I'm going to write this out for those who need it. We have negative 2i times negative 2i. All right, so what's negative 2 times negative 2? Okay, that's positive 4. And then we have, we have I times I, which gives us I squared. All right, so let's stop right here, and let me get a sticky note. All right, so what we know is that what we know is that I is equal to the square root of negative 1, right? I squared means it's going to be I times I, which means it's going to be the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1. And so whenever you multiply this, square root of negative 1 times square root of negative 1, the square roots cancel out, right? So we're just left with negative 1. So just like whenever we did it over here, this is root 5 times root 5, right? Because they're both, as this, we have a square root times a square root, these cancel out, and then we're left with just 5. All right, so what that means is that I squared is equal to negative 1. So now that I know that, what I can do is everywhere I see I squared, I can replace it with negative 1. So I have 4 times negative 1. And what is 4 times negative 1? Negative 4. Okay, so if y'all didn't want to do all the stuff, okay, what y'all could have done is y'all could have said negative squared is positive. Okay, 2 squared is 4, then I squared is I squared, and just remember that I squared is equal to negative 1. This is something you guys have to have memorized. Then, looking at number 7, we're going to simplify the square root of 3 over 3i, the whole thing squared. So I'm going to go ahead and start by just having it separated. So it means it's the square root of 3 over 3i times square root of 3 over 3i. All right, so looking at this, okay, root 3 times root 3 is the square root of 9, which is just 3. All right, then we have, okay. Trying to get my life together, cool. So then we have 3 times 3 on the bottom. So 3 times 3 on the bottom will give us 9. And then we have I times I. Okay, I times I will give us I squared. Okay, so looking at this, 3 over 9 reduces to 1/3. And I squared is really negative 1. So 1/3 times negative 1 gives us negative 1/3. All right. So that is examples by taking the square root. All right, so then now on the bottom, we're going to be solving by taking completing the square. Okay, so basically we're going to complete the square. So I'm going to be abbreviating CTS, complete the square. Okay, so a lot of y'all in your quizzes, you guys kind of like forgot how to do this. You guys know how to do it, but I guess you guys are not familiar with the term. Completing the square is whenever we take the b, the middle value, divide by 2, and square it. So y'all know the process. Some of y'all just don't know the process name, so if that's you, make sure that you guys are knowing that this is completing the square. All right, so looking at number 1, we have x squared plus 4x minus 20 is equal to 0. All right, so we have x squared plus 4x. I'm going to put that plus sign, blank, put this in parentheses, minus 20 minus blank is equal to 0. All right, and then I think this one's a little bit too thick. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do the b divided by 2, the whole thing squared. So my b value is 4. I'm going to divide this by 2. What's 4 divided by 2? That's 2. So in factored form, we put this as x plus 2 squared. Okay, so this 2 is where I'm getting this 2 from. And then if I square this, okay, so if I take this 2 and square it, I get 4. And so this 4 is what goes into this blank. Because our coefficient, our a was equal to 1, okay, we don't have to multiply by anything, so I can go ahead and just put 4 on the other side. So then we have x plus 2, the whole thing squared, minus, was 20 minus 4, negative 20 minus 4, negative 24. And we're going to set that equal to 0. Okay, so we're still working with square roots. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the squared on this side, and I'm going to add the 24 to the other side. So then this is equal to 24. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of this side and square root of that side. So the square root of something squared, they just cancel out, so I'm left with x plus 2 on this side. On the other side, make sure you have a plus or minus, and we did the square root of 24 earlier. Okay, so let's just scroll back. Square root of 24 is 2 root 6. All right, so this is 2 root 6. And again, if y'all need this, it's a factor trees, y'all could do that. So this is 2 times 12, 2 times 6, 2 times 3. You take a pair of those 2 out, and then you multiply these and leave it inside. All right, but are we done? No, because we need to get x by itself. Okay, in order to get x by itself, we're going to subtract both sides by 2. So then we have negative 2 plus or minus 2 root 6. All right, so we have negative 2 plus or minus 2. Can we cancel out those? No, that second 2 is attached to root 6. All right, so this will be our answer, just like this. Okay, can't do anything else. All right, so then over here, what we're going to do is the same thing. We're completing the square. Okay, so we have x squared plus 12x plus blank in parentheses plus 49 minus blank is equal to 0. All right, so I'm taking my b term. Okay, so I have my b divided by 2, the whole thing squared. Okay, so my b is 12. Okay, 12 divided by 2 gives me 6. So in parentheses, I have x plus 6, the whole thing squared. That's in factored form. All right, and then if I actually went ahead and squared it, trying to see different colors. Okay, so if I went ahead and squared it, 6 squared gives us 36. And because a was equal to 1, a is equal to 1, we can just go ahead and put 36 in the other blank and simplify. So 49 minus 36 gives us 13 equals 0. All right, so then what we want to do is want to get the square root by itself. The x plus 6, the whole thing squared by itself. In order to do that, we're going to subtract 13 to the other side. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of both sides. So over here, again, okay, the square root and square cancel out, so we're left with x plus 6. On this side, we need that plus or minus. Anytime you'll see the square root of negative 13, okay, you guys know that we can take an I out. So again, y'all can put the I outside like that, or y'all can put in front of it, in front of the root 13. Okay, it's whatever you prefer. And then we still need to get x by itself. So in order to do that, we subtract 6 from both sides. So therefore, x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus root 13 I. All right, so looking at number 4, okay, we have x squared plus x plus blank in parentheses, subtracting 11 minus blank equals 0. All right, so our b value is 1. So I'm going to do b divided by 2, which is 1/2 squared. So 1 divided by 2 is 1/2, right? And then we're going to square it. So this looks a little bit weird because now we're dealing with fractions. So over here in factored form will be x plus 1/2 squared. Okay, so again, this 1/2 is coming from here, or the 1/2 in the parentheses is coming from the b divided by 2, 1 divided by 2. And now what we're going to do is we're going to square it. So when we square this, we square the top. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4. So 1/4 goes into that blank, which also goes into this blank. All right, so now we're dealing with fractions. Not a big deal. All right, so what we have now is we need combined like terms. So we need to combine these together. So we have negative 11 minus 1 over 4. Okay, so some of y'all use mixed numbers. Okay, so this will be negative 11 1/4. And then I prefer if y'all change it to improper fractions. So by doing that, you take 4, you multiply by 11, so that gives negative 44. And then you add 1, which will give us 45 all over 4. All right, if y'all don't like that method, we know that if the common denominator is 4, so what we know is that negative 11 will be negative 44 over 4, and we're subtracting 1 over 4, which also gives us negative 45 all over 4. All right, so just figure out what works for you. All right, so then once we have this, we're going to go ahead and get the square root by itself because it's equal to 0, we're solving. Or get whatever squared by itself. Get this guy by itself. So we have x plus 1/2, the whole thing squared. I'm going to go ahead and add the 45 over 4 to the other side. You always do the opposite. So if it's subtraction, you add it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. So square root of this side will be x plus 1/2. On the other side, make sure I have a plus or minus. I'm going to go ahead and break this up. This is going to be the square root of 45 all over the square root of 4. Let me break it up over here. Plus or minus square root of 45 all over the square root of 4. Oh! Okay. Why is it that big? Okay. All right, so just looking at this, okay, I want to go sideways. 45, I'm doing the square root method. Okay, so 45, the perfect square that goes in is 9. 9 times 5 gives us 45. And the square root of 4 will give us 2. The square root of 9 is 3. So we have plus or minus 3 root 5 all over 2. Okay, so again, you guys know how to do this. Okay, y'all can either use factor trees or the square root method. Do whatever you think works for you. All right, so then over here we have our plus or minus 3 root 5 all over 2. And I need to get x by itself, so in order to get x by itself, I had to subtract 1/2 from both sides. So therefore, x is equal to negative 1/2 plus or minus 3 root 5 all over 2. So we can write it like this. Some books will also teach y'all to do, since they have a common denominator, y'all can say it's negative 1 plus or minus 3 root 5 all over 2. Okay, either way, it works. Okay. All right, so that was dealing with fractions. So let's see what the next one deals with. Oh, whoops, guys. I skipped number 3. Awkward. Okay, we'll come back to that. Let's go ahead and do number 5. Okay, so we have x squared plus 14x plus something, in parentheses, minus 99 minus something. All right, so we take our b value, which is 14. Okay, we're going to divide by 2. Okay, so 14 divided by 2 is 7, and then 7 squared is 49. Okay, so in factored form, we have x plus 7, the whole thing squared, and then the 49 that we got here goes over here, which also means it goes over here. All right, so then we're just going to do the same process all over again. Okay, combining like terms. Okay, negative 99 minus 49 is negative 148, and this whole thing is equal to 0. All right, so then I'm going to go ahead and get the whatever squared by itself. I'm going to get this guy by itself. So we have x plus 7, the whole thing squared, is equal to 148. Positive 148. We're going to take the square root of both sides. The square root and square cancel out, so we're left with x plus 7 is equal to 148. Okay, so I don't know the perfect square that goes in, so bear with me because I'm going to do the factor trees off to the side somewhere. I'm like, okay, so that's what? 2 times what? 2 times 74? Yep. Okay, and then this will be, what's half of 74? Half of 70 is 35, 36, 37. Okay. So 2 times 37 gives us 74. Since we're taking a square root, we want to pair the same numbers, which will be 2. Make sure you all put your plus or minus, and then inside the root will be 37. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to try to get the x by itself. So when we're trying to get the x by itself, we have x equals negative 7 plus or minus 2 root 37. Hopefully I did that right. I'm sure that someone will correct me if I did it wrong. All right. So all the examples that we just did, okay, numbers 1, 2, 4, and 5, that's when a was equal to 1. All right, so now we're going to do examples where a is greater than 1. All right, so let's go ahead and try this out. So first thing is I want to move everything to the left-hand side. So I'm moving the 5 over, subtracting it over. Then we have 2x squared minus 4x. We're going to add something. We're going to subtract 5, and we're subtracting something. Okay, because there's a number in front, a is greater than 1, we need to factor that out. So I'm going to take a 2 out. Notice I'm not taking any x's out. I'm not taking the GCF out. I'm just taking the number they have in common out. So we take a 2 out, so we're left with x squared minus 2x plus something minus 5 minus something. All right, and then we do the same process all over again. We have b divided by 2, the whole thing squared. My b value is negative 2. I'm going to divide by 2. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So it'll be x minus 1 over here, the whole thing squared, bring down the 2. Whoops. So this is equal to negative 1, and then negative 1 squared gives us positive 1, which is what goes into the first blank. And so then, before we move this over, remember, because we factor out the 2, we took this 2 out, there's a 1, so we need to multiply it. So 2 times 1 just gives us 2. All right, so then combining like terms, -5 minus 2 gives us -7 is equal to 0. Then what we're going to do is we're going to just get the whatever squared by itself. So first thing I need to do is I need to move the 7 over. So I'm going to add it over to the other side. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So then I have x minus 1, the whole thing squared. Whoops, I'm running out of room. Equals 7 all over 2. Okay, I need to get x by itself. So we're going to go ahead and take the square root. So the square root of this guy is just going to be x minus 1. The square root of this guy is going to be plus or minus root 7 all over root 2. I'm going to go ahead and separate it. And then I need to add the 1 over, but before we do that, we don't like radicals on the bottom. Okay, so we need to rationalize the denominator. So what I mean by that is we're going to multiply top and bottom by root 2. So I'm running out of space. That's root 2, root 2. All right, so what we're left with is going to be x minus 1 equals plus or minus root 7 times root 2 gives us root 14. And then root 2 times root 2 is square root of 4, which gives us just 2. Okay, you notice that we can't reduce the root 14 over 2 because they're even, because the 14 is inside the radical, so you can't just reduce like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the 1 to the other side, so x equals positive 1 plus or minus root 14 all over 2. All right, so then looking at the last one, okay, we have 4x squared equals 16x minus 2. So I'm going to move everything to the left-hand side. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and subtract 16x over. I'm going to go ahead and add 2 over, set this equal to 0. Then the next step is we have 4x squared minus 16x, okay, plus something gives us positive 2 minus something equals 0. All right, so over here, because a is not equal to 1, we got to take that 4 out. So when I take that 4 out, we have x squared. 4 times what gives us negative 16? Negative 4. We're going to add something, bring down the plus 2 minus blank equals 0. All right, so then we have our b divided by 2, the whole thing squared. So our b is negative 4. We're divided by 2, so that gives us negative 2, and we're going to square that. So that's going to give us positive 4 into the first blank. For factored form, bring down the 4 that's outside, and then whatever's in here, okay, whatever your b divided by 2 is going to be the value that goes in. All right, we're going to add the 2 minus blank equals 0. So what goes into this blank? All right, I'm having a lot of issues. Okay, so we have 4 times 4, which will give us 16. And so let me go ahead and erase those. So positive 2 minus 16 gives us negative 14, and we have this equal to 0. Okay, so now we need to get the whatever squared by itself. So we have 4x minus 2, the whole thing squared, is equal to positive 14. I added the 14 over. Divide both sides by 4. So then we have x minus 2, the whole thing squared, is equal to 7 over 2. I reduced that side. And then to undo something that's being squared, you square root it. So over here we have x minus 2 equals plus or minus. Over here, remember, we can break this up as the square root of 7 all over the square root of 2. Okay, do we like radicals on the bottom? No, so we have to rationalize it. So we multiply top and bottom by root 2. Root 7 times root 2 is root 14, and then root 2 times root 2 is 2. And we get the same thing up there, similar. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add the 2 over. So then we have x is equal to 2 plus or minus root 14 all over 2. All right, so there's a lot of algebra involved, okay, but y'all know how to complete the square. Y'all know that I squared is equal to -1 and I is equal to I is equal to square root of -1. And looking at this, I forgot to do number 4. Awkward. Okay, so let's just go ahead and get this done. Not a big deal. So we want to get the 1/4 x squared by itself first. I'm going to subtract 9 over. All right, how do I get x squared by itself? Right now it's being multiplied by 1/4, so how do I get rid of it? You multiply it by the reciprocal, which is 4/1. So these cancel out, so we have x squared is equal to -36. And then we take the square root of both sides. So the square root of x is x. The square root of -36 will be plus or minus 6i. All right. Looks crazy. Hopefully you guys understand. If y'all don't, ask your neighbors and then come and ask me. All right. Good luck, guys.